I would now like to introduce our Honorable Chief Guest and our first speaker of the day, Lieutenant General A.K. Singh. Lieutenant General A.K. Singh, the erstwhile Lieutenant Governor of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and Pondicherry, is the ex-GOC in Sea Southern Command and has been an alumni of NDA, Staff College Camberley, UK, Malinowski Tank Academy, Moscow and the Higher Command, and National Defence College courses. He is one of the few officers to have trained with both the NATO and Warsaw Pact at the height of Cold War. Known for his high integrity and professionalism, the General is looked upon as a role model by large numbers in the armed forces. Lieutenant General A.K. Singh is remembered in both the UTs for his high integrity, professional approach and caring attitude for the common man. Development initiatives and projects were fast-tracked and many citizens refer to his tenure as the golden period. He completed his tenure in August 16. He has been a member of Prime Minister's Team India, as also a member of the National Development Council and Interstate Council. Lieutenant General A.K. Singh has been decorated with numerous awards, both related to defence as well as civil. He is a frequent speaker at defence and civil forums and also contributes to the print media. I would now like to invite Lieutenant General A.K. Singh to please share his words.
Dr. Zaidi, other distinguished guests on the rostrum, all delegates, especially those who have come from outside Lucknow, and dear students. The aim of this summit is to promote peace and tolerance and to motivate people to be committed to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030. And this summit has been organized, as Dr. Zaidi mentioned, by Youth for Human Rights India, whose main aim, as I could gather, is to promote and educate and train youth and adults about human rights as per the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the promotion of sustainable development goals. This is what attracted me, and one day I was in Dehradun with Colonel Rana and he mentioned this, and then Dr. Zaidi got in touch. First I thought, what should, a lot of people will think, what is the Army General doing in the middle of human rights? But I think for us, human rights are critical, and I will explain to you. So I think this is a noble vision and very noble charter. And I feel privileged to be part of this initiative. And I compliment Dr. Zaidi and her organization for having undertaken this and also wish them the very best for the future. She is a very strict person. She told me, Jalal Sahab, you will have 5 minutes to speak. So I said, then I'll record it and send it to you. Then she exceeded it a little. She said, okay, you can speak for 10 minutes. So what I'll do is that in the 10 minutes that have been allotted to me, I'll try and speak. I'm speaking in English because there are some delegates who will find it difficult to understand Hindi. नहीं तो हिंदी में बोलने में और ज़्यादा मज़ा आता है. I will speak on 2 organizations that I have been associated with and how human rights are critical to both. First, of course, is the Indian Army. And second, I will speak about Andaman and Nicobar Islands, where I was the Lieutenant Governor for 3 years, more than 3 years, especially the primitive tribes who live in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. and they have a right too. And how India is trying to give them this right. So first about the Indian Army. How many of you know about the Indian Army? Raise your hands, please. Wow. Have you read sometime back, there was a poll by one of the magazines, which is the most trustworthy organization in India, in our country. And which was that organization? When we talk of the Indian Army, we must also include the Indian Air Force, the Indian Navy, but since I am an army man, so I'll use the term army more. You know, the armed forces are the greatest stakeholders in protecting human rights and peace, because we know what horrors are created through conflict and strife and war. And therefore, unlike what TV channels show you, the armed forces are not too keen to go and fight if we can solve the problem through peace. Our very presence should ensure that peace prevails, and that is normally what our focus is. But sometimes when that cannot happen, then we have to enforce that peace. That is our charter. So let me talk a little about the Indian Army. If the Indian Army is considered the most trustworthy, reliable organization in our country, which every citizen of this country looks up to, and let me say a very admired organization in the whole world. What is it that makes the Indian Armed Forces so? The first is that whenever the country has called us out, we have always responded. We are the last resort of this country, and there is nobody behind us, and we are very conscious of this. कि जब एक काम हमारे पास आ जाता है, when we get a task, we have to complete it. There is nobody else whom we can hand it over to. And you see it often when our police forces don't succeed or don't perform the task, when the administration is not able to perform the task, when violence goes beyond a certain level, the Indian Armed Forces are called out. So what are the core values of this organization, the Indian Armed Forces? The first is, we are apolitical. Now you must understand what apolitical means. Apolitical means that we don't serve any particular political party. We don't have a preference for any political party. We serve the government of the day and the constitution of this country. The second is, we are secular. I know secular is a word that is not so popular these days, but we live together, we work together, we train together, we fight together, irrespective of caste, creed, religion or region. In fact, there is much to learn from the armed forces for the rest of the country. If we can do it, people come from all walks of life, all regions, all religions. When I was commanding Sikh troops, I used to wear a kada, I used to go to the Gurdwara Sahib. So that is the ethos of the army. And last but not the least, we are highly professional. Now let me talk a little about the Indian Armed Forces and human rights. Way back in 1955, when we were just independent for about 8 years, then Chief of Army Staff sent a message to all the troops who were engaged in counter-insurgency operations in the Northeast and elsewhere. And his message or special order of the day said, you are not there to fight our people, but to protect them. You are fighting only those who threaten the lives and property of our people and who endanger that. Your job is to protect them. This message very well sums up the Indian Armed Forces ethos and respect for human rights. Irrespective of the difficult operational situation that we operate in, including a proxy war that is going on in Jammu and Kashmir, the Indian Armed Forces in fact all security forces, follow the twin ethics of minimum force and good faith. All actions that we undertake are in good faith. In fact, the Indian Armed Forces personnel have been issued 10 commandments by the organization and they have to abide by it. They carry a card in their pocket which lists out those 10 commandments. Upholding human rights and the dignity of the people is the first. Even during operational encounters, आप रोज पढ़ते होंगे कभी कश्मीर में टेररिस्ट के साथ एनकाउंटर हो रहा है, इंसर्जेंट्स के साथ हो रहा है, प्रॉक्सी वॉर जो पाकिस्तान से लोग आ रहे हैं उनके साथ होता है. Even in such situations, the Indian Army only uses small arms, rifles. That's it. We don't use heavier weapons. We don't use artillery. We don't use tanks. We don't use helicopter gunships. We don't use air force. Now, please contrast this with what some of the other armies do in such situations. Look at Pakistan. Look at the Americans. Look at Afghanistan. Look at Iraq. Look at Syria. They use every weapon that is available to them. And that causes a large amount of loss of life and collateral damage. In fact, we are losing some of our young officers because of this fact that we do not use heavier weapons. If there are two terrorists holed up in a building, what is the easiest thing to do? To blast off the building. But if we blast off the building, there may be 2-3 innocents inside who will also suffer. So this gives you an idea of how the Indian Army actually respects human rights. This is not to deny the fact that sometimes there may be violations of human rights. We are a 1.3 million strong armed force. And when you are engaged in such situations, sometimes errors do happen. But wherever there is such a case, the case is investigated very, very fast and the culprits or those found guilty are brought to book. And you see what is happening in the rest of the society? Justice is never done. The cases keep going on and on. But there is also a counter narrative. What about the human rights of the armed forces personnel? They are also human beings. When they function in such areas, many organizations, some in the garb of even peace and human rights, I must say, level false charges. What does that Jawan, how can he counter these false charges? And that is why the government has enacted a special act, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, to ensure that innocent personnel from the armed forces are not unnecessarily dragged into false cases. So let me just conclude this by saying that you can be very proud of your armed forces as far as respecting human rights are concerned. We are very conscious of the fact that most of these actions are taking place within our own territory, amongst our own people. Some may be misguided, but the bulk are innocent. And therefore, we are very conscious that we have to win them over through love and affection and not through excessive use of force. Force is only used, minimum force is used when it is inescapable and when it goes on, when some people go on to threaten the peace and tranquility or the lives of the people living in that area. The second issue I wish to talk of is Andaman and Nicobar Islands. How many of you have been to Andaman and Nicobar? Please raise your hand. बहुत ही कम लोग गए. You know, once I was in Andaman and one of my friends wanted to send me a letter or some parcel. And he went to the post office and he gave the address. General A.K. Singh Raj Niwas, Port Blair. So that guy asked him, "Ye Port Blair kaun si country mein hai?" That is the knowledge. Even here most people haven't seen. Let me tell you briefly about Andaman Nicobar Islands. The Andaman Nicobar Islands lie in the Bay of Bengal. a group of 608 islands which spread over 750 kilometers from north to south and about 60 to 80 kilometers in width. They are 1200 kilometers from Indian coastline and just about few hundred kilometers from Southeast Asia. They are like an unsinkable aircraft carrier protecting the Bay of Bengal and the routes that pass from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. They are inhabited by about 30,000 very primitive tribal groups, and I will talk of them. But also the Indian government has settled about a lot of settlers from various parts of this country. There are people from every region, and today the population may be around 4.5 lakhs or so. It's often called, people have very high education, high standards, very peaceful place. There is no discord based on religion or any other thing. It's often referred to as a mini India. In fact, if there is a true reflection of our constitution and the ethos of the Constitution of India, first is of course the armed forces, and I'm very proud to say I belong to the armed forces. And the second is the people of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. They represent the true spirit of our constitution, and I've had the privilege of being associated with them. God has been kind. When I reached there, I found that there were 4 competing claims in Andaman Nicobar. First, of course, was the development issues. When people have been settled there, they have desires, they want to progress, they want all the fruits of modernization. Why not? It's their right. But there is another issue, and that is the security. The Andaman Nicobar Islands are very, very critical to India from the security point of view. So you have development, you have security, and often there's a conflict. The third issue is the environment. It's one of the best hotspots in the world. Andaman Nicobar Islands, you will not believe, are 94% forest, deep forest or mangroves. It's one of the most pristine places in the world. If you ever go to Andaman, as you're coming into land at Port Blair Airport and you look down, you can see the bottom of the ocean. So clean they are. I haven't been to Caribbean, but people who have been to Caribbean and Andaman, they say that Andaman Nicobar Islands will beat the Caribbean islands any day as far as environmental issues are concerned. And last but not the least are the tribals who stay in Andaman Nicobar. There are about 30,000 tribals. 28,000 plus are Nicobaris who are almost in the mainstream. They've been educated, they have entered most walks of life, but there are 4 other tribal groups. The Andamanese and the Ongis, they are few in number, I think in double digits. And they were decimated during the British period. I mean, we are just trying to protect them. But there are 2-3 others. There is the Jarawas, you would have heard of, they live north of Port Blair. And there are the Champins who live in the southernmost part of our country, that is the Great Nicobar Island. And last but not least are the Sentinelese. There are two origins. One is the Mongolide origin, and then there are those who are the Negroid origin. It is believed that they have lived in the Andaman Nicobar Islands for over 50,000 years. So when I reached there, I found that each of these 4 centers of gravity, development, security, environment, and the tribals, were at conflict with each other. So it was my focus to tell them, and I think I succeeded to some extent, to tell them that you cannot work at cross purpose. You have to learn to live in harmony with each other, not at the cost of each other. Only then will Andaman Nicobar progress. I'll just talk of 2 tribal groups so that you get an idea what is the challenge. First I'll talk of is the Jarawas. They live they are of the Negroid origin. They live in a reserved forest area, 1,000 square kilometers north of Port Blair. They are approximately 450 in number. And initially they were very hostile. The Andaman Trunk Road passes through their area and they used to shoot arrows and also kill people. Then one of them got injured and we brought him to the hospital, treated him well, and he went back and he became an ambassador. So they are no longer so hostile. But there is a conflict in our own minds as to what should be done with them. They still live in a very, very primitive, isolated environment. They have their own language, they don't wear clothes, they have their own customs and traditions. They don't understand the modern world. So I called a conference of the best anthropologists available in the world and in India. And I proposed to them that there are two views, and you please come out with an answer as to what should the government of India and the Union Territory administration should do. The first view is that, which is supported by a large number of anthropologists, and their view was that please leave these tribals alone. Just give them a reserved forest area. Any contact with modernization has been detrimental to the tribal population. But there is a contrary view. The contrary view is that who are we to deny them the fruits of modernization? Why shouldn't their children also go to school? Why shouldn't they aspire to fly in an aircraft which crosses the forest, over the forest almost daily? So finally the anthropologists couldn't come to a conclusion, because when you get too many specialists into a room, they can't agree. So I had to take the decision, and we decided that we will certainly move forward. We will move forward by ascertaining the will of the Jarawas. Where do they want to go? At what pace do they want to go? And I'm glad to say that we are making significant movement forward. Just to give you an example, their women and men don't wear clothes, but their women have been seeing visitors passing through the trunk road. So we got a request from them that can we get some clothes? How do we communicate with them? We have a special force called Atam Janjati Vikas Samiti in Andaman who speak their language. It's a government organization of about 30-40 people. So the chief secretary came to me and there was a lot of opposition. I said, no, why don't you give them clothes? After all, if they are wanting only thing, give them clothes which are cellular, which they can wear in the jungle. And you know what these women did? They would only wear the clothes when they were crossing the road, because they saw others were also wearing. When they went back into the jungle, they would fold them and put them inside. Second was on education. Now, how do we start teaching them? You can't teach them our language. So we created 7 hotspots. We had some anthropologists there, and we created a bilingual lipi of their language, which is known as Ang, with Hindi. And we slowly started a barter system. We would encourage them to bring their children, we'd give them rice in Hindi. So that's how we have started moving forward. It is their right, but their right as decided by them. We cannot impose anything on these tribals who live in a different era, who live in a different world. The second group is centenaries, a group of just less than 100 tribes. They live in an island called North Sentinel Island. It's about 40 kilometers southwest of Port Blair, and there is no contact with them. In fact, they are the only tribe, and probably one more tribe in the world, where there is no contact with humanity. And whenever we have tried to make contact, they have been very hostile. So the government of India's policy was hands off, just leave them alone. So I called my group, including the Chief Secretary and the Director General Police, and I said, who's responsible for their safety and well-being? So they said, sir, you are. I said, how can I be responsible if the policy of the government is hands-off? I don't even know what is the condition. So we wrote to the Government of India, Tribal Welfare Ministry, and we got the policy changed. The policy today is hands-off but eyes on. So it's our responsibility. So once in a while we have a helicopter sortie over them, once in a while we send a ship to circumnavigate to sea. And we caught some poachers there, poachers from outside India, because they knew our policy was hands-off, so they would come and anchor there. What if they had supplied some substance to these tribes, and they would have been harmed. Last year, if any of you read newspapers, there was an American called, I think, John or something, who ventured to North Sentinel Island unauthorizedly. and it is believed, presumed, his body has not been found, it is presumed that the tribes have killed him. There was a lot of debate on this. I also wrote in the media and said that I think we need to just let them be. If they do not want contact, let's not. And there's a handful of population. The point I'm trying to make is that human rights is a very, very intricate, it is simple, yet at the same time very intricate and complex. As Dr. Zaidi had said, that human rights have to be granted to the people in the form that they desire. Of course, there is a basic universality about the human rights, but they become very important for those who are weak and marginalized, who cannot take care of them. Okay, I think Dr. Zaidi is looking at her watch. So,
This is what about all I was just listening.
as a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, India accepts that recognition of the inherent rights to all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in this world. And let me, before I conclude, just add a word about the youth, because bulk of the people who are sitting here are young. You are the future of not only our country, but you are the future of mankind, of the earth, of the globe. My own impression is that the youth of today is more idealistic and more vibrant than we were. हमारे टाइम में, in our times, what was the ethos which guided our working pattern? Photographers आप सामने से हट जाइए. Hello. So what was the ethos that guided us? We used to work थोड़ा डर के. We used to work with a little fear. Let me not lose. I should not make a mistake. Now, if you are doing something, you are bound to make mistakes. And what is the ethos of the youth of today? Can any of you get up and explain to me? What is the general ethos of the youth of today? What is your guiding principles? If I can explain, I asked my son, what is the guiding principle of the youth of today? And you know what was his answer? Chill. I said, I don't understand what chill means. He said, chill, Dad, don't ask such things. But I understand that your ethos today is more positive than ours was. And your ethos is, I can, I shall, I will. So once you make up your mind, there is nothing that will deter you. And I think the society today, your own parents, teachers are willing to give you more chances to go into fields that you really want to. I conclude with a quote from UN Deputy Secretary General Jan Eliasson. He used to be, not there now. And what he writes is very pertinent. He says, there can be no peace without development. But there can be no development without peace. So you see the intricate link between development and peace. No development without peace, and no lasting peace or sustainable development without respect for human rights and the rule of law. That is the basis for peace and development. So I end with my quote, which I often use whenever I talk to people. It will be in Hindi, and those who don't understand, maybe some of your colleagues can translate it. Nikle the akele manzil ki or. That I started the journey alone. निकले थे अकेले मंजिल की ओर, लोग मिलते गए और कारवां बन गया. I started the journey alone, people kept joining and became a long caravan. So please go ahead and do what Dr. Zaidi has been trying to propagate.